encanta que estemos comiendo esto, sin preguntarnos siquiera de dónde salió. Me iría muy bien si encontrara munición ahora mismo.
Okay, so let's begin class. And today we are discussing
Hello YouTube, how you doing today everybody? Listen, I'm going to do a video on how to make pickled Pepsi at home. That's what I'm going to tell you. I've seen a video about KFC making pickled Pepsi, and the guy that was reviewing it, it was crazy. 2 pickles, little bit of Pepsi, which I'm going to show you how to do it at home for cheap. And the guy paid $3.99, almost $4 for it. What the hell? You could go home and make it for free. And this one I'm going to show you right now. I got my Pepsi, got my glass, I got my pickle jars with pickles. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to put the pickles in the jar first. That's what it is, yeah. So, yeah. Here's one. Just want to cooperate with me today. There's 2. Down. Put the lid on the thing. This is very easy. I don't know what the hell KFC was ever thinking of. Like, what the heck, man? $4 for a thing that you can just make at home. See? 2 pickles in a pickle jar. See? Cheap and easy. What the hell, man? And Pepsi. Open it up. Oh, yes, I forgot one thing. Pickle brine. Right. There you go, a little bit of that. See, this one's pickle brine with pickles in it. Same thing. I'm not going to do the hot sauce thing today because it might mix it up. Stomach ain't feeling right. Now I'm pouring in Pepsi. Like they said. I don't have ice, I never use ice. So yeah, there we go. Cheap and easy. Now obviously, the guy said on the video, oh, it tastes awful. Well, just wait. We're going to give that theory a theory. And you got that right. I'm going to taste it. You know what? The guy was wrong. It tastes very darn good. It does. I mean, I like it. I mean, the taste is so sweet. Buttery. Because I'm using butter pickles. Yeah, it's very good. I like it. But I would not spend $3.99 for a thing at KFC. Nah. They probably use old pickles and old brine. Whatever, I'm using some stuff anyways. So, you know, this is pretty good. Another wizardry drink. Wow. Now I'm going to eat the pickles. Yep, very good. So if you don't want to spend $4.99, $3.99, don't go to KFC and don't buy the pickle drink. Make it at home for cheap and free. Thank you, YouTube. Oh yeah, by the way, cheers.
Oh, no. Oh, no, no, no.
Hello YouTube, how you doing? It's me, Marty again. Today I'm going to be doing another video. It's a crazy drink video that I got. And it's going to be featuring Prime. Everybody knows what Prime is, and they already know what that is. I've already opened it. And I got 2 glasses here with that same Prime in it. And it's going to be very simple and easy. I'm going to taste this one first. That's good. And this one I'm going to put a little bit of hot sauce in it. I love my hot sauce. There we go. Wow, that's the best. Wow. Ooh. Good hot in the morning. Wow. Okay, now keep this going. Now 2 glasses. Another Prime. Pour it in. Pour it in. Do the same as last time. It's simple and easy.
Or do you think you're the coolest guy in the parking lot, and then this guy shows up? Or do you think you're the coolest guy in the parking lot, and then this guy shows up?
AI soldiers are the future.
This power plant is at the center of a battle between finance giants and the American people over who controls the basic necessities of everyday life. Almost exactly a year ago, we made a video about BlackRock. And remember how last time I was like, calm down guys, they don't own the whole world, it depends on how you define own, blah blah blah. Well okay, that video was about how they invest in stocks. But what if I told you there's a whole other side to this story where they're getting a lot closer to controlling some of the most critical parts of our everyday lives? Just 12 days after we released that video, BlackRock acquired Global Infrastructure Partners. And since that deal, they've been a lot more involved in infrastructure. You might have heard stuff like how they bought the Panama Canal. But now there's another deal you might not have heard about. They're trying to buy Minnesota Power, a company that owns this power plant and provides power to 150,000 people. This is a type of investment in what they like to call real assets, which is finance code for literally anything tangible. Basically everything we need to survive, like housing, infrastructure, and the land those things are built on. This is a test case for companies like BlackRock expanding into industries that we use every day. Things like water, hospitals, and electricity. And if they haven't already, they could be coming to your town soon. So why is BlackRock trying to change course, and what will it mean if they succeed?
Last summer, I scattered my wife's ashes.
Qué
on the south
pajero
coast.
yo, ¿no?
I don't want BlackRock to own it.
So, BlackRock bought Global Infrastructure Partners, which is a big investment fund that itself buys up things like water and waste systems, transportation companies, and even large shares of entire airports. If you've flown in or out of London, congratulations, you're probably a customer of GIP. So BlackRock owns Global Infrastructure Partners, which is trying to buy Elite, which owns Minnesota Power, which owns infrastructure like power plants, dams, and the land they're on. But since people need power, it's not that easy, even for BlackRock, and there's a somewhat democratic process involved. This is State Senator Jen McEwen, who represents many of the people who would be affected by the buyout.
Wisely and correctly, we have a Public Utilities Commission, at the very least, to try to provide some regulatory oversight for these entities that have this monopoly over providing this essential service.
Usually when private equity and asset managers buy stuff, they just do it behind closed doors. But because people would literally die without power, it's considered a critical service, and therefore a regulated monopoly under Minnesota law.
BlackRock doesn't necessarily have the same amount of reporting responsibilities as a publicly traded corporation. We've had a lack of transparency already regarding our rates and the quality of services in our community in Superior. That ability to access that data would be decreased by the purchase, which would be a huge problem.
The community has made it clear that they oppose the deal, and a judge has already recommended against it. But it doesn't end there. The final approval is going to come from the Public Utility Commission, a board made up of just 5 people appointed by the government. This could have huge implications for anyone who uses basic utilities like electricity or water, i.e. the things that keep us from freezing to death in the woods. Because if they realize it's profitable, nothing will stop them. I didn't want to just sit around at my desk, so I came out here to Duluth to talk to some community members and leaders and hear what they had to say about the buyout. I went on a hike with longtime Minnesota Power employee and customer Bob Tammett.
I should have asked you if you want a walking stick. I got an extra walking stick. At your age, you don't need a walking stick. So I helped install the power lines that haul electricity from this powerhouse to my kitchen. This dam, the land we're standing on right here, it'll all go to the control of BlackRock.
Bob took us on a hike in the Boundary Waters to see some of the infrastructure that would be sold. He's been canoeing out here for decades. But power plants, lines, and dams aren't all that GIP and by extension BlackRock would get in the deal.
What concerns me about BlackRock purchasing Minnesota Power is that Minnesota Power owns a large amount of land where we're parked right now. They own a lot of real estate. Some of that real estate has minerals. So if BlackRock acquires ownership of those minerals, will they develop those minerals for the long-term benefit of northern Minnesota, or will they develop those minerals for the short-term profit of BlackRock?
Back in Duluth, people were pretty concerned about their communities and bills.
We depend on Minnesota Power for our regional economy, for our heat, for our transportation, and indeed for our clean water. We need this company to continue to make long-term investments in our community, but that's not what this acquisition is about. This acquisition is about maximizing short-term profit.
There's a whole host of decisions that they're going to be making, and those decisions will no longer necessarily be just motivated by the board of directors working on behalf of the shareholders for Minnesota Power, a broad portfolio of people. It will just be these 2 private equity companies. If the Minnesota PUC does a good job and is able to hold down rate increases, the only outcome that I can imagine is that these 2 owners will say, well, we're not making as much money as we thought we were going to make from this thing, and they're going to sell it. And then who do they sell it to?
And this kind of thing has happened before in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with a power company called UPCO. This is Alyssa Jean Schaefer, the Director of Climate and Energy at the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. If
we look at northern Michigan, there's a utility called the Upper Peninsula Power Company, or UPCO. This was acquired by a private equity firm in 2014.
UPCO customers have seen a spike in their rates many say they can't afford.
After the private equity firm took it over, shortly thereafter, they raised the bills. A couple years later, bills went up again. Then that private equity firm sold it to a different private equity firm. Once the new private equity owners were in control, they raised bills again. Since 2014, UPCO, being owned by private equity, has seen 4 bill hikes.
There's nothing stopping BlackRock from doing the same thing in Minnesota, and in addition to bill hikes, it could even trample existing laws.
Well, today Governor Walz signed a bill that requires utility companies provide 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040.
But after the deal goes through, we don't know if BlackRock will follow those laws. Their size and capital imbue them with the power to basically ignore this kind of thing. To them, the fees are chump change, and who do you think is more powerful, the Minnesota State Legislature or BlackRock?
There's no requirement that they pursue this clean energy vision. We're going into the sale on promises.
But remember, BlackRock isn't directly purchasing Minnesota Power. Global Infrastructure Partners is purchasing its parent company, Elite, which also owns Superior Water, Light, and Power just over the border in Wisconsin.
So we've been looking at double-digit rate increases every 2 years, and our rates are already some of the highest in the entire state, and that's not a coincidence.
So let's zoom out for a minute. If you saw my last video about BlackRock, you know that they don't really own everything, they just have a small percentage of ownership in everything, specifically publicly listed companies that you could buy shares of too. But this buyout shows a general shift in strategy. They're looking to fully own or majority own entire infrastructure systems by taking those companies off the public stock market altogether. And while BlackRock's just been dipping their toes into real assets, and it's still a relatively small slice of their giant portfolio, there have been some big players in this game for a while now. Brookfield is the biggest owner of real assets, and real assets are the bread and butter of BlackRock's doppelganger, Blackstone. Even though Blackstone is overall smaller, they're actually much more efficient at generating returns for their investors. So of course BlackRock is now looking for their piece of the pie. Here are the totally not frightening categories of things these asset managers are trying to get as much control of and profit out of as possible. Water, farmland, housing, transportation, schools and hospitals, and energy and telecommunications, including data centers. So that makes the list really all the things I, for one, wouldn't last very long without. I don't know about you, but I personally love food, housing, electricity, and water, and want affordable access to it. Check out this house. It has lines bringing in electricity and phone and internet. It has pipes bringing water in and out, roads bring in food, and tenants pay rent. BlackRock wants a cut of all of those things.
In addition to potentially raising customers' bills, they might be looking for ways to cut costs. This could look like reduction in the job force. It could look at like reduction in operation and maintenance.
If you don't have enough people to do a job, you're going to get people hurt.
And the Minnesota Power case is just one point on the map. If we zoom out, there's a larger cycle we're already in. Here's the playbook. Asset managers buy the thing, often using debt, massive loans they get just because they're already rich. Then they run the thing as cheaply as possible for a few years and finally sell it, often to another asset manager or private equity firm, and ideally at a large profit. This is super profitable for guys like Larry Fink, but not so much for anyone who relies on those things they want. And there's a reason necessities like apartment buildings, water, and parking are all at the heart of this. There are things where even if you maybe kind of have a choice to use a different provider, it's logistically pretty hard or downright impossible. For BlackRock, that's basically free money.
Utilities in regulated states such as Minnesota have a captive rate base. They have captive customers. Having a group of customers that have nowhere else to turn for access to electricity, that is a very attractive financial proposition.
So how exactly do these deals work? They bank on you not understanding, so let's try to understand. Usually they'll set up an investment fund and give it a snazzy name like BlackRock Global Infrastructure Fund 4. And then they'll get a bunch of big companies to sign on to invest with them. The asset manager itself will invest a little bit too, just to show everyone else they have some skin in the game, but usually only between 1 and 5%. And then the investment fund, this thing they just made up like a group project for supervillains, goes and buys the thing. Investing is always about risk, but BlackRock's risk to itself is minimized because when they take out loans, they borrow against the company they're buying, not themselves. That's like if I bought a Honda Civic on a loan and then the car was in debt instead of me. And when that's a public utility, it's the customers or taxpayers even paying off that debt for them. This means you're not just paying for power or water or whatever, you're also paying off an asset manager's loan from a bank, which, if they default on, will sink the company they're buying, but not the asset manager that took out the loan in the first place. Isn't it so cool how if you or I default on our student loans or medical debt, it can ruin our lives, but if Bestie Larry, I don't know, flubs an airport and can't pay back $700 million, the captain just gets to walk away from the ship? Love that for us. Ah! Now apply this to housing and roads and tolls and everything. When this happens on a huge scale, what that means is that none of these companies exist to serve customers. They exist to maintain stuff that asset managers then own and rent back to us. And often all these resources are intertwined. One reason BlackRock wants more control over energy is something we've all been hearing a lot about lately. America's favorite rainbow copyright infringement machine. We're in the midst of an arms race for who can own the most data center infrastructure, and never put it past BlackRock to try to get their pound of flesh. And if this isn't already a problem in your area, buckle up.
It appears that BlackRock is moving very aggressively to insert themselves at just about every angle of the supply chain when it comes to AI data centers, and that includes everything from data center development itself to the computer software, computer hardware, and now with this move into local utility companies, possibly even the power companies that would be powering those data centers.
You don't need to take Alyssa Jean's word for it. Here's BlackRock's own Larry Fink.
We need energy, but we also need the last mile. We need a power line that goes from the energy source to the energy user. There's only so much BlackRock can do about that. This is really important to unlock. If we can't unlock it, we're not going to grow. If we're not going to unlock this, it's going to be harder and harder to build out these AI data centers.
Just face a lot of the burden on our state. Are we going to have the fight at the state level to try to take on these private equity trillion-dollar investors who own more than the state of Minnesota?
So to come back to the literally eternal question, does BlackRock own your life? Kinda. They certainly want to. And this mode of ownership provides them way more direct control and profit than stock portfolios do. It also gives them a much more direct relationship with you and your bank account. Just because your bill doesn't say BlackRock Power doesn't mean they don't get your money.
The Public Works Committee over there has approved a contract to work with a consultant to help us look at the feasibility of purchasing our utility assets from Superior Water, Light and Power.
I'd like to see us moving in the direction of having more ownership distributed amongst the community, but what we're moving toward is even more corporate consolidation, even more toward the monopolist model, even more toward a model where the control over this essential service is separated from the community and the decisions that are made about it are going to be out of our hands.
But it doesn't have to be this way, and everybody I spoke to seemed to want pretty much the same thing. In Wisconsin, they're even trying to buy their power company back to get out of this BlackRock situation and so that they won't have to go through this kind of thing again.
We should remember that even though we might live a long ways apart, we're all neighbors. Our grid is all connected together. We have a little powerhouse here. It's connected into the grid that goes all over the United States, and generally, if people are good neighbors, everybody is careful that they don't take more power than the grid can handle. The system works. I think we should all be good neighbors. We should have local control, local communication, and be neighbors on a national level.
The final hearing for the buyout is on September 25th, and the actual decision is set to be made on October 3rd. So if you live in Minnesota or Wisconsin, now's a great time to talk to your representatives and go to those meetings. Thank you to the advocacy groups working on this issue, CURE, Sierra Club, Private Equity Stakeholder Project, and the Citizens Utility Board. And thank you for watching. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and send us your story ideas at stories@perfectunion.us.
Running your business on the go just got easier with the QuickBooks mobile app.
And I talk us, it's really a kind of ugly fascist architecture, and I think it's
Apartémonos para observar sí que es magia.
And I can see my own chair where I go. Okay, well, thank you for coming. I think this is a very appropriate room to talk about. It's really a kind of ugly fascist architecture, and that's kind of the stuff. There's no amplification, and I'll try to. But it's really hard to pitch for now. I've done that at times, and it's really strange. So if you can't hear, just come sit down closer. Plenty of room all around here, and sound is coming fairly soon, they say. And I can't move around because I'm a slave to the media here, as you can see. Okay. The title of the talk is Imperialism, Drugs, and Social Control. And the problem you have about talking about imperialism is that it's not accepted as a legitimate word by the major media, by our political leaders, by most of our mainstream academics. That is, they do not believe that imperialism, which has been and still is the most powerful force in the history of this world, in shaping the map of this world, they do not believe that it exists. If you say 19th century British imperialism, they'll say, oh, yes. Or if you say Soviet imperialism, they'll say, oh, yes. But if you say US imperialism or Western imperialism, they'll say, you're being ideological, aren't you? What are you talking about? Oh, do you have a conspiracy theory? This reminds me of something I want to add to this lecture, but I forgot to. Just wait a second, since we're waiting for the sound. Okay. Imperialism, what they talk about in academia, you can't talk about imperialism. You cannot write your master's thesis or your PhD. If you go to your advisor and say, I want to do something on Western imperialism in Central America. I say, we don't like to do ideological things. You have to do scientific, empirical stuff, and that's not a real subject. So you say, well, can I do something on development theory, independence theory? Oh yeah, you could do that. So you call it development theory. But if you start talking about realities of imperialism and you write that, they'll say, well, it seems to me you're being ideological again, not realizing how ideological they are in rejecting the terrible realities of what's going on in the world. Imperialism is when the ruling elites, the dominant interests of one country, control the land, the labor, the resources, the technology, the markets, and the wealth, the financial structure of another country, to the detriment of the ordinary people in the other country, and often to great cost to the people in the metropolitan country, in the imperialist country too. In other words, we aren't the benefits of U.S. imperialism in Central America. We help pay a lot of the overhead costs. We pay high taxes so they can have their global military machine to keep control of everything. See the media, they start clicking when you gesture. That's when they Right? Is that right? I was talking for 10 minutes, the guy didn't do anything. But the minute I started besides which you're blocking Senator Garland's view. Okay. We pay, in terms of the high taxes, to pay for that global military machine which controls, which is set up. It really costs a lot of money to have 14 now, 14 aircraft carrier units. You don't get just an aircraft carrier. When you send out an aircraft carrier, you have to have destroyers and all sorts of surveillance planes and protect it. It's a whole force. 14 aircraft carrier forces. 300 major military bases all around the world. We pay that. When you're worried about scholarships and you're not getting it, or high taxes and that, you got to understand that's where that money is going. And you pay palpably A lot of you I know have already worked and earned your first paycheck. Do you remember that sensation when you got that first paycheck and you looked at it and you said, there must be some mistake. And you said, no, there's no mistake. Here's the rest over here. We took off for this, for that. We took off for the cruise missiles, for the new tactical air-to-surface missiles. We took off for the B-1 bomber and the B-2 bomber and all that. What we call it federal tax and stuff. That's what you're paying for, and that's coming palpably right out of the lives of our people. When we don't have money for roads, when we don't have money for hospitals, when we have to cut rehabilitation clinics for drug addicts, and we don't have the money for it. We don't have money for textbooks in schools in some parts of this country. It's because that money is going to pay for the overhead costs of imperialism, to protect and maintain a U.S. force throughout the world, to protect that class that George Bush belongs to protect his friends of that class. And to protect that class, you have to protect that system that serves that class. And to protect that system, you have to protect that military, that global military establishment that protects that system. We also pay in terms of the export of our jobs. Our jobs go to Central America, Asia, Africa. And General Motors closes down plants and eliminates jobs. What GM doesn't tell you is that when they close plants down here, they're opening plants in Indonesia and Brazil and South Korea and those places. For 15 years I've been hearing about General Motors closing plants, General Motors taking a beating, General Motors laying off workers, General Motors. That's what you don't know. Yet last month, the Fortune 500 came out, and the biggest, richest industrial corporation in America is what? General Motors. General Motors is the biggest. And General Motors now says, we're not an American corporation. We're international. We don't belong to any one country. Of course they don't want to belong to any one country. They want to be above the laws of all countries. We're up there. But when their interests are at stake, then they do come, they get very socialistic. They come to the public treasury, to the public taxes, and they ask for our money to build up the public military forces to protect their private wealth. That's what imperialism is about. We also pay in the neglect of the social needs in our country. We also pay in that the lives of our sons and daughters, our brothers and sisters are put at risk and killed. We've now in Iraq already lost 42 military personnel, plus one suicide, 43. And there hasn't been any war yet. The other sufferers of imperialism are the peoples of the third world, those who must work at subsistence wages when they're lucky enough to get a job. They will suffer terrible neglect of social needs. There are parts of Central America where whole chunks of the population have absolutely no access to a single hospital or health clinic or anything of the sort. They suffer political repression. They suffer environmental devastation. We always think of the environment as being devastated in industrial areas like LA or New York or in the industrialized world. But you should go to the third world. The land is in a state of shock. There are no environmental protections against the massive use of pesticides. There's no occupational safety laws, no minimum wage laws, none of those things. The result of all that, though, are profit rates of exploitation that are 200 and 300% higher than they are even in the United States or Western Europe. So that's what imperialism is about. Now, to justify that arrangement, for almost 80 years, the United States and other Western countries have used the Bolshevik menace. In the beginning, later on they call it the Soviet menace. That is, we had to maintain this great military machine to meet the Soviet challenge. Now, I argue in The Sword and the Dollar, long before the dramatic changes in Eastern Europe, which is still going on, that if the communist countries were to disappear tomorrow, that we would still need a huge military establishment. I said, it's too bad reality isn't like an experiment where you can control for a certain variable and you can test your hypothesis. Well, sometimes reality is like an experiment. That particular variable suddenly is dissolving itself and we are testing. And the test shows so far that indeed that's exactly what happens. That our leaders get up and they say, we have to be in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Grenada, Indonesia, and so many other places. We had to be in those places. We had to overthrow those governments. We had to support dictators and death squads, or sometimes elected governments. You can get elections in a lot of these countries, but they are elections which exclude working class. And you exclude the working class as you do, for instance, good portions of the poor and working class in this country, not necessarily by disfranchising them, but by giving them nothing to vote for, by giving them two candidates who are both members of the oligarchy. We had to do all that stuff because of the Soviet menace. We had to do all that. Well, I argue that was being done not because of the Soviet menace, and I and others of us on the left, but because we had to make the world safe for multinational investments, for big banks and big oil companies that own so much of that world. And that you couldn't tell the American people who were out there doing all this to make the world safe for Chase Manhattan and General Motors. So you had to tell them we were making the world safe for our national security. But you couldn't convince them that a little Grenada or Panama or Nicaragua was a threat to our national security. So you said that, oh, the Nicaraguans were the puppets of the Cubans who were the puppets of Moscow. Now you have a situation where the global evil empire is just, the leader of the evil empire has just won the Nobel Peace Prize, and the empire itself is dissolving and cutting its troops dramatically, 15%. And if the global military machine were a response to Soviet aggression, why are U.S. leaders saying, we can't cut our defenses now? You heard George Bush the other day, he just, a couple months ago, said, we can't cut, that dynamic way he talks, just turns you on, you're like, oh, Georgie, hit me with it. Oh. We can't cut the muscle out of our defense posture. Admiral Trust, who's chief of naval operations, the highest ranking officer
Qué
in the
pedo
US
con el
Navy,
culiado,
he said,
boludo.
the function of the U.S. Navy is not merely to defend us from the Soviet Union. We have many other functions. I said, oh, that's interesting. I always thought it was the Soviet menace. No. The Navy has to show the flag in different places. Now, that's an interesting phrase, show the flag. That's what we used to call imperialism, gunboat diplomacy. Where you go bring your battleship into an area and you show the flag and you intimidate the people there and you let them know we've got this power and if you don't behave, we'll bombard your port and we'll do this and the other thing. And we have to also give support to U.S. forces in regional conflicts. Read Third World National Liberation Wars. So they're saying we still need that global empire, that global military machine, because we have a global economic empire in which the multinational corporations invest and enrich themselves at great benefit to themselves and sometimes at great cost to us. All the time at great cost to us. You can understand now why when Reagan went into the Persian Gulf with that fleet to protect the oil supply coming out during the Iran-Iraq war, and people said, wait a minute, this whole operation is costing us $2 for every dollar's worth of oil we're taking out. That's a losing proposition. But Reagan kept doing it. Why? Because the $2 was being paid by you out of that little paycheck you get. And the $1 went to the oil cartels. And people said, wait a minute. About 18% of that, or what it was, 12% of that oil comes here. The rest of it goes to France, and Japan, and Germany, and other places. That's right, they're not protecting your oil supply. They're protecting, and they're not protecting Japan and France's oil supply. They're protecting the oil supply of the Seven Sisters, the giant oil companies. They're protecting Gulf and Exxon and Mobil and British Petroleum, and that's what they're doing. And they'll spend $2 of your money to protect $1 of their money. They'll spend $3, $4, $5 of your money. Money is no object when it's your money protecting my money. That's what it's about. There's another reason why you have to keep this global military machine, and that's because it happens to be one of the greatest sources of domestic capital investment right here in America. Military spending is an essential part of this economy. It also is the single most profitable part. It is heavily subsidized. There are guaranteed cost overruns. There's non-competitive bidding for contracts. It represents a form of government spending that business can live with. You see, it's like any other private contract that business gets. They get a contract for, to build a building or to build tanks. That's profits for them. It's very different from government spending that goes into the non-profit public sector for human services and such. When you expand that sector, the more you expand that sector, the more you're saying we could do much of this, carry on much of the business of living without someone having to make profits from it. But in military spending, there are very direct and immediate contract profits. And a military contract, by the way, is the best kind of profit. It's a contracted market. You see, if I'm making refrigerators, I have to worry about selling those refrigerators. But if I got this contract to make planes or tanks, it's already guaranteed from me. So it's really quite a deal. It doesn't cut into profits the way environmental controls do, or safety, health regulations, and all those other things that government might do to protect the quality of our lives. In fact, it increases profits. It also happens to be one of the greatest polluters around the military. So those are the two reasons why, even if the Soviet Union disappears, and the Soviet Union cuts its military forces even more dramatically and withdraws from Eastern Europe as it is doing, our leaders will still argue that we need a military machine. Those are the two reasons: military-industrial complex profits and the necessities of third world imperialism. But without the Soviet menace, without that justification, our leaders have to cast around for new enemies. And we get a whole cast of enemies. As the existing communist governments transform themselves into right-wing capitalist governments, which is what Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Poland has done, and the left won fair elections in Romania and Bulgaria, but the right pressure is there too, and they will eventually be unseated. And I think you see the same thing happening in various republics in the Soviet Union. As they convert into right-wing, retrograde, anti-Semitic, chauvinistic, ethnocentric, pro-Western imperialist governments, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Poland just voted with the United States to condemn human rights violations in Cuba. Czechoslovakia has never uttered a word since Havel has become president, has never uttered a word of condemnation of human rights in El Salvador, or in Guatemala, or in any of the other U.S. client states. Now, as you see that happening, who are going to be the new enemies to justify this global military machine that is rationally and definitely needed as a form of capital formation, capital investment, capital return, capital accumulation, and as an instrument of imperialism? Who is going to justify? What are you going to justify? You conjure up new enemies and you start